Keep on the sunny side, always on the sunny side. Keep on the sunny side of life. It will help us every day, it will brighten all the way. If you keep on the sunny side of life.
Hi there, my name is Joe Martin. I'm pastor at First Baptist Church in Toledo, Washington, and I want to thank you for taking a few moments. I want to talk to you about a subject that sometimes we, especially people that would think about themselves as church-going or religious people, they don't consider its danger, and it's called misguided zeal. I want to remind you that one of the great founding leaders of all the followers of Jesus was a person who was once called Saul, who later was known as Paul, and he wrote much of the New Testament. And Paul, who was testifying once he was being persecuted and arrested for his faith, in Acts 26, he talks about his own personal experience with misguided zeal, with what I would call religious unbelief. In Acts 26:9, he says, "So then I thought to myself that I had to do many things hostile to the name of Jesus of Nazareth." And this is him testifying before a Roman court. "And this is just what I did in Jerusalem. Not only did I lock up many of the saints in prisons, having received authority from the chief priests, but also when they were being put to death, I cast my vote against them. And as I punished them, often in all the synagogues, I tried to force them to blaspheme, and being furiously enraged at them, I kept pursuing them, even to foreign cities. While so enraged as I was journeying to Damascus with the authority and commission of the chief priests, at midday, O king, I saw on my way a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shining all around me and those who were journeying with me. And when we had all fallen to the ground, I heard a voice saying to me in the Hebrew dialect, 'Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? And it is hard for you to kick against the goads.' And I said, 'Who are you, Lord?' And the Lord said, 'I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But get up and stand on your feet. For this purpose I have appeared to you, to appoint you a minister and a witness, not only to the things which you have seen, but also to things in which I will appear to you, rescuing you from the Jewish people and from the Gentiles to whom I am sending you, to open their eyes so that they may turn from darkness to light, from the dominion of Satan to God, that they may receive forgiveness of sins and the inheritance among those who have been sanctified by faith in me." Paul was talking about this experience. Now, you have to remember, Paul was incredibly religious. He was a rabbi. He was of the strict sect of the Pharisees. Gamaliel was his mentor. Touching the law, he says he was blameless. He was a rule keeper. He was into it. He was zealous for his faith. But, in the way, it didn't make him a loving person. He was enraged. He was hostile. He was putting people to death and persecuting them, trying to get them to deny their faith and blaspheme. But he was completely sincere. He thought he was right. He talks about it later in Galatians 1:13. "For you have heard of my former manner of life in Judaism, how I used to persecute the church of God beyond measure and tried to destroy it. And I was advancing in Judaism beyond many of my contemporaries among my countrymen, being more extremely zealous for my ancestral traditions." He isn't talking about necessarily restricting it to his, the Torah, but his ancestral traditions, the Pharisees, the rules of his sect, we would say the rules of that particular denomination or their culture, or whatever the political dynamic of that day was. Later on, Paul described this in the book of Romans as a misguided zeal. And he talked about people like him and people that were still in that mode. For I testify about them in Romans 10:2, that they have a zeal for God, but not in accordance with knowledge. This idea of misguided zeal, I have definitely made this blunder and been trapped in this by the enemy. So much damage, almost all of the great damage done to the cause of Christ and to people trying to communicate the love of God around the world. You know, the colonial period, the neo-colonial period, the the treatment of indigenous people, the crusades, we can roll it back. It's all people that they did this thinking that they were doing something right. They were sincere about it. They were sincerely wrong. Misguided zeal, and it does a lot of damage. And oftentimes this is really rooted, even nowadays, in what I call religious idealism. You know, I mentioned this in my class on last Sunday about the quote from Bonhoeffer, that this is this idea of some of you maybe and others have kind of this belief in this kind of misinformed zeal that hinders and destroys the real. When you're so focused on the ideal, you end up destroying the real. In your zeal for the perfect church, you criticize and destroy the real church. You jump around. You move from church to church, situation from situations, and pretty soon you will end up being a part of the church of one, yourself, or maybe a couple of people in your family that don't have a lot of choice. You will end up you will sacrifice what your current, this is always malleable, your current idea of what the perfect church is. Your ideal will end up destroying the real. And rather than growing together and learning love and moving together in love and growing in that and helping each other, the strong help the weak. This is the picture, the people that were coming along together and apprenticing each other and helping each other. You're like the ideal destroys the real. And in your zeal for this perfection, you destroy the imperfect. You hinder it, and you stunt it, and you persecute it. Religious unbelief, by the way, just aside, is not just for religious people, for the classically religious people. Many avid secularists are actually religious unbelievers. They are very religious in their beliefs in whatever they might be, but they are still beliefs. You cannot prove the non-existence of God, yet people will zealously contend for this faith that God doesn't exist. There are no absolutes. I believe absolutely. You cannot prove the non-existence of God. Now, that I realize that can be a logical fallacy either way, that you cannot prove it, therefore it's not true, or you cannot not prove it, therefore it is true. This is a blunder, but what happens is people will have these strongly held religious beliefs, whether to believe in God or to believe not in God, and it is a religious belief. If you dismiss the first cause argument being, if you look at the trees out here, and the trees, where'd that tree come from? And that tree came from a cone, or a seed that came from a cone that came from a tree, and you go back. What was the first cause? Where did the first seed or the first cone or the first tree come from that started it all? And what people will say when you bring up the issue of the first cause, you cannot, they'll say, well, the first cause argument, it's so worn out. That doesn't answer the question, though. It's not a rational solution. It's a statement of faith that you decided that believing in a first cause isn't something you're willing to do. You're not willing to consider it because it is heresy in your religion of unbelief. You can't entertain the possibility that there could be a first cause called God. If you say the multiverse is your solution, that's quite popular in the media and everywhere. That is a religious belief. And even that doesn't really answer the first cause issue, is where did the multiverse come from? This is the idea that the way we explain the absolutely impossible odds that life randomly just started, what we have to do is have multiple universes, that there's so many universes within the universes within the universes that somehow it ups the odds, but it really doesn't change them much. Jesus was regularly hindered by religious people. And they were by religious unbelief. People unwilling to humbly admit that perhaps they don't see the full picture. Perhaps the work of God is beyond their explanation. The very supernatural God that they long for, they argue against because, well, it's supernatural. They can't explain it. This Sunday's message is really going to touch on the issue of religious unbelief or freedom and healing, because these are kind of in opposition of each other. You can't get the freedom and healing that Jesus offers if you are in unbelief. And if you will experience God's healing in your life in faith, you must be if you're going to receive the healing that comes by faith, you have to put that faith on Jesus and not on other God-denying faith claims. And that's really what they are. For those of you who are already trying to follow Jesus, you have to always be on your guard about worshiping the ideals over the real, about worshiping your ideas and your opinions and your preferences and your culture over the gospel and over God himself, over the beauty of Jesus Christ himself. This is incredibly important to watch for and guard against. It's one of the schemes of the enemy, that people cut themselves off and isolate themselves because of not the love of God or the power of God or the supernatural work of God, but their own prideful insistence on religious unbelief. And so I really hope that you will come Sunday and you will bring some folks with you, and you'll have some things to think about, and we're going to talk about how Jesus Christ is the one person that can bring you the healing and the grace that you really need. Thanks for watching, and please share it if you can.